Hey, my name's Ben Yenny, and I don't make movies. I help filmmakers make money from their movies. Today we're going to be talking about the 3 different ways to project exactly how much money your movie is going to make. And since that is totally on brand, let's get started. So, as I said, there are 3 different ways you can make revenue projections for an independent film. The first are sales agency estimates. The second is through a competitive analysis. And the third is through an audience analysis. And we're going to go a little bit more into what each of those is and how to get or make them later on. But let's just start with an overview. The big reason you need any of these is to convince an investor to give you money for your film. But they all have different ancillary uses as well. A sales agency estimate are essentially numbers you would get from a sales agent based on your particular film and how much they think they could sell it for. Normally there are highs and lows at an early stage. They are very unreliable and generally fairly inflated. The benefits of a sales agency estimate is that it also proves you can access traditional distribution. And a lot of times it'll come with a letter of intent, which will help assuage some of your investors' fears. Again, the biggest drawback is they're generally pretty largely inflated. The point of a competitive analysis is primarily to convince your investors that your potential investment is viable. It's not the only reason, but it is by far the biggest. It's important that when you're doing this research, you only use films from about the past 5 to 7 years for reasons that we'll get more into later. The biggest benefit of a competitive analysis is that anybody can do this research. But it's not just about the research, it's also about the methodology and finding the best sources for the most reliable data. And that's where the real trick lies. The audience analysis helps you not only convince your investors, but it will also help your sales agents and even give you a better idea of how to build your audience and build community by starting with where they are and what they tend to buy. It's also always useful to know more about who you are making the film for. The biggest drawback is that it is extremely time consuming to make an audience analysis. To get a sales agency estimate, you need to establish a relationship with a relevant sales agent. Now, what do I mean by relevant? Some sales agents only work on horror films. Some only work on thrillers. Most have a preferred budget range. And if you try to approach somebody who primarily sells $250,000 films with a $20 million epic, it's not going to pan out so well for you. Same with the people who make $5 million films and trying to get them to pick up your micro budget feature at an early stage. Again, it's not going to work out so well. But the biggest takeaway here is that this isn't just something they do if any old filmmaker calls them up. Normally, you have to have met them in person at something like a film market and established a rapport before getting them to give you this service and ideally give you the letter of intent as well. So once you've met them and established a rapport, you should talk to them about your project and convince them that they want to be involved, even at an early stage. After that, you'll have to follow up. Normally, you'll have to follow up 3 or 4 times. If you follow up more than 6 or 7 times and they really haven't gotten back to you, consider it a dead lead and move on. And finally, if you can get them to give you the revenue projections and their sell sheet as to what they will sell the film to their buyers for, you should really try to get a letter of intent as well, because these sales estimates don't mean a hell of a lot unless it's from that same sales agent. Also, it's generally good business for them to give you a letter of intent. That means that they're going to be able to keep their pipeline full of content that they know they can sell. A competitive analysis is something that you can either make yourself or hire a consultant or company to do for you. My personal favorite company on this is Nash Info Services. They run the-numbers.com, which is where I generally go for a lot of my data anyway. Full disclosure, I have done the occasional consulting call for them. But they have some of the most up-to-date data in the industry that I've seen. So, step one is to find 20 to 30 similar films from the past 5 to 7 years. Every industry changes over time. Film changes extremely quickly, especially right now. Even though film is considered a mature industry, it still changes a lot in half a decade. That's why you only want to use films from 2015 or later as of the publishing and shooting of this video, which is in 2020. If you have to, you can go to 2013, but you really don't want to go beyond that. You want to see how similar films have fared under similar economic conditions, and the amount of content being made is one of those conditions, and it's only going up. So really 2013 is already pretty far out of date in terms of what films can be made and what they will make. As an example, I don't even think we were past Avengers Phase 1, or if we were, barely. And now we're all the way past Phase 3, and Phase 1 changed a lot of big studio politics. If someone commented, I might do a meta-analysis on something like that in the future. Oh, while we're on the topic of comments, though, what genre is your film going to be? It's actually a huge part of your competitive analysis, or any level of this. You need to understand what genre your film is going to be and how other films of the same genre and the same budget range and the same general level of attachments have done in the recent past. And as you can see from what I just brought up, genre, budget, attachments, and intellectual property are some of the biggest things that qualify a film as similar to yours. Just because you're making a $110,000 found footage film doesn't mean that it's going to be the next Paranormal Activity. There are so many found footage films made every year, and there are really only 2 major franchises that you've ever heard of that have done just big bucks basically ever, and that's Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. Even if you're making a found footage film, they're probably not going to do anywhere near as well as those 2 films did. Step 2, you need to find as much data as you can, and this would be box office, which is easy to find, physical media, which is fairly widely available. But where it starts to get tricky is when you're talking about video on demand and general streaming revenue. Most companies pay a certain amount for an independent film, just as a flat rate, for subscription. Some pay a royalty. Amazon's highest among them. Most AVOD platforms pay a royalty more than paying a flat license fee. But figuring out exactly what this is going to look like for you as a filmmaker is going to be extremely difficult. You should also figure out what the international revenue is likely to be based on the international revenue from these other films. Really, you'd love to just get the actual average territorial sales price, but that's not an easy figure to track down. And for most low-budget films, the answer to that is just a revenue share deal. Third, you need to make assumptions. I know assumptions have kind of a bad rap about them, but you're never going to be able to know exactly how much everything's going to sell for, so you need to make certain assumptions, and you'll need to outline your methodology. And finally, you need to do math. You need to do a lot of math based on all of those assumptions and those methodologies. These are things that consultants can help you with dramatically, and they will make your assumptions more likely to be accurate, and the methodology that they use is likely going to be better than the methodology that you use. But it's not going to be foolproof. Again, I tend to use Nash Info Services for this. I used to do this service myself. I have since started outsourcing it to them because they have better data than I do, and not all of it is available to the public on their site. So finally, we come to the third and really most viable way of doing revenue projections for your independent film, and that is by starting with your audience. This is more akin to traditional market research that would be done for any sort of company, be it a startup, small business, anything. And it all starts with understanding who you're going to be selling your product to. Who is your core demographic? Once you understand who your core demographic is by looking primarily at age, race, and niche interests, you'll need to understand the spending power of that demographic. Once you understand the spending power, you'll need to figure out if they actually spend money on media. And if so, how do they spend it? Do they go to the theater? Do they buy transactional VOD? Do they buy physical media still because they live in a place where internet isn't great? It's important to understand all of these things if you're going to make accurate revenue projections. Step 4, you have to find precedents. Actually, even finding precedents is sometimes very useful even in step 1. And a good way to do that is to look at similar films to yours, like you did for the competitive analysis, on IMDb Pro, just to see what the ratings look like for those similar films. Like if it does very well with 18 to 24-year-old females, that could be a very good place to start your general demography research. There are a couple of other links, resources that you can use that I'll link below, one of which is the MPAA Theme Report, which is an annual report that published by the, it's not the MPAA anymore, it's just the MPA, based on who actually goes to the movies anymore. And it's not complete, but it's a very good place to start. Step 5, you should try to see if your demographic is underserved. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just say you're targeting, you're making a movie that appeals to Latinx individuals, and you're making a thriller. So you want to target, let's say, 18 to 24-year-old Latinx people who are looking for horrors and thrillers. And that market probably is underserved. I don't know. I haven't done this research. I'd look to see what other films have been made for this demographic, again, in the past 5 years. If you have trouble getting to 20 over the past 5 years, just on those pretty strict guidelines, you're going to be in a good spot to help. They're probably a pretty underserved demographic. Now, if you find 0, there's probably a reason for that. There has to be some level of films that have been made recently for this demographic. And if there isn't, it probably isn't really going to be viable just because nobody wants it. At least that's the feeling of most investors I've talked to. After you've figured out if they're underserved, you should find out where these people tend to hang out, both online and in real life. For the in real life portion, you want to be somewhere around you because you might actually want to go to that place. Same online. The last step is to actually get involved with this community because these people are going to be your early adopters for your film. And if you want them to actually help you spread the word about your film, you can't just be showing up with a completed product saying, hey, sell this for me, because I say so. You need to actually understand them and be a part of that community. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and feel free to check out the other videos on this end card. I'm still getting the hang of it, so I am not 100% sure I did it right this time, although I'm pretty sure I did it better than last time. The common question for today is, what genre is your next film or general project? And if you have any questions about this video or anything else, please feel free to leave them as a comment below. I monitor that pretty closely as of right now. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks very much.